Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of BCP Council's Audit and Governance Committee. I'm Councillor John Beasley, the Chairman. The members are in 2 rows in front of me, with the officers in the 2 rows behind. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Mr. Hanton from Democratic Services, who will deal with the housekeeping arrangements. Mr. Hanton.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Please note that this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee is being recorded by the Council and will be published on the Council's website for a minimum of 6 months. Any councillors or officers not in the room and wishing to speak, please use the raise your hand feature and switch on your video when invited to speak. Please could members who are in the room only speak when invited to by the Chair and mute their microphones when not speaking. And finally, please could members also ensure that background noise is kept to a minimum and that mobile phones and other devices are switched off or onto silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanton. We'll now take item 1 on the agenda. Apologies. Mr. Hanton.
Chairman, we've received apologies from Councilman. We've also had apologies from Peter Barber, who is the Grant Thornton, the external audit, and from Susan Zeiss, the monitoring officer, and from the leader of council. And the leader of council has asked if I can read out a couple of sentences from her to explain her apologies, and this is as follows. This is from the leader of council. It has been the custom and practice of this council for the leader to attend meetings of the Audit and Governance Committee. However, this is not always possible due to the heavy and varied commitments that the leader is expected to attend, and given that the finance and audit brief is not sitting with me, I hope you will accept my apologies. The portfolio holder for finance has a professional background in audit, and he will attend meetings on my behalf when I am unable to do so, as on this occasion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hanton. Item 2 on the agenda is substitutes. Do we have a substitute member? Mr. Hanton.
Chairman, I have received formal notification that the Green Party have appointed Councillor Armstrong as substitute for Councillor Salmon, but Councillor Armstrong isn't with us at the moment, so may be having some trouble, but at the moment, no substitutes are appointed and acting.
Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda is the election of chair for the 2023-24 municipal year, and it's at this point that I will hand over the chair to Councillor Dedman, who is chairman of the council. Councillor Dedman.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Beasley. Yes, I'm chairman of the council, and for this item I will be in the chair. I'm asking for nominations for the chair of the Audit and Governance Committee. Do I see any nominations? Yes, Councillor.
I'd like to nominate Marcus Andrews, please.
I'm sorry, Mike.
I'd like Marcus Andrews.
Marcus Andrews.
Right. For the video, for the record, for the council, please say their name. When
I'm sorry, yes.
Councillor Adrian Chapman-Law, and I would like to nominate Marcus Andrews.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Chapman-Law. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Phipps.
I'm Councillor Margaret Phipps, and I'd like to second that nomination, please, for Marcus Andrews. Thank you.
Sorry, do we have any more nominations from the floor? Yes, I see Councillor Beasley. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. I would like to self-nominate for the chair and seek a seconder.
I'm sorry, I'm turning it off when I should turn it on. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Beasley as chairman? Councillor Beasley, I see no seconder, so I think I'll appeal to us as a nomination.
Chairman, that means that there's only one councillor validly nominated. Yes.
Right. Do I have any more nominations for chairman of the Audit and Governance Committee? Right, then I think we have to agree, very happily agree, that Councillor Marcus Andrews is the Audit and Governance Committee Chairman for this year. Would you like to come up to the table?
Chairman, again, just for the record, I see that Councillor Armstrong has now joined us, and also I'd like to say that Councillor Armstrong has been appointed as substitute for Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the nomination, which I'm proud to accept. Can I, before we move on to the next item, which is the election of the Vice Chair, put on record my thanks to Councillor Beasley for his work and endeavours in the steerage of audit and governance since his council was formed in 2019. I was on the committee for about 2.5 years and witnessed personally his great skill as a chair. If I can only partially be as good as chairman as himself, I would be very pleased. So with that, I would like to move on to item 4, which is the election of vice chair, namely to elect a vice chair for audit and governance for the municipal year. Can I call for some nominations? What, please? Yes, councillor, you make mention of your name, please.
I'm Councillor Richard Herrott. I'd like to nominate Councillor Eleanor Connolly.
Okay, are there any seconders, please?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm Councillor Castle, and I'd like to second that for Eleanor Connolly to be second up vice chair.
Okay, we have a valid proposer and a seconder. Can I call for any other nominations for vice chair, please? I'm looking around the room and there are no other indications, so I think I will now defer to the Mr. Hatton as to the situation. I think it's probably similar to the chairman situation, please.
Yes, Chairman.
So on that basis, with Councillor Connolly being duly proposed and seconded as vice chair, I would call upon her to join me up at the top table, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, moving on. Item 5, declarations of interests. Councillors are requested to declare any interest on items included in this agenda. So if anybody has a particular declaration to make, could you please indicate? I can't see any, so there's a no on that. Item 6 is confirmation of the. There are actually only 2 councillors who were on the committee from the previous municipal year, and I would like probably them together to act as a team to propose and second this. Thank you.
Happy to propose them, Chairman.
Oh, can I have your name?
And happy to second, Chairman.
So we've got a proposal from Margaret Phipps, and Councillor Beasley is seconding it. So I will now sign. Moving on, item 7, public issues. This is to do with potential public questions, statements and petitions. Again, Mr. Hatton, can you advise whether we have any?
Chairman, there's no public issues for this meeting.
Thank you very much. Moving swiftly on now to item 8, which is the Treasury Management Monitoring outturn, an update for the next quarter. Just to outline this, this report sets out the monitoring of the Council's Treasury Management function for the period of 1st of April 22 to the 31st of March 23. And to present this particular paper and report, we have joining us online Matt Filmer, who is the Assistant Chief Financial Officer. So, Mr. Filmer, can you join us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Audit and Governance Committee. So, as the Chair just outlined, this is the quarterly update that the committee received in regards to the Council's Treasury Management function. For those new to the committee, Treasury Management is principally, it's around borrowing and investments and the management of risks associated with those activities. It is one of the most fundamental parts of the financial management of the council, but it's also one of the most technical areas as well. So, in conjunction with the chair, as set out in the report, I'll look to pencil in a training session for the committee members so that you can gain a thorough understanding of Treasury Management and take on your role as committee of scrutiny of that function. And I'll look for our Treasury Management advisors, Link Asset Services, to facilitate that session. So hopefully in the next couple of months that session will be in your diaries. So the quarterly Treasury Management update always starts with a brief economic update, which is important to understand the economic environment that we find ourselves in and how we deal with that in terms of our activities for Treasury Management. So the key update, which I'm sure is the increasing bank rate, which we've seen back in June, has now peaked at 5%. The Bank of England meet again next week, this time next week, with most of the market predicting another increase of at least 0.25% on top of that 5% base rate. Although anyone that's seen the inflation figures, they did drop down for June. We were at 8.7 for May as per the report, and it's now down to 7.9%. So whether or not we see a 0.25% increase or higher, we'll have to see for next week. But we monitor that very closely as part of our activities. So the first half of the report focuses on the outturn position for 22-23. Table 2 sets out the budgetary performance of the Treasury Management function, and you'll see that we ended the year with a 1.9 million surplus against the budget. Now, as you'll see on that table, that's principally driven by higher rates of return on our investments. When we set the budget, we had forecasts in terms of interest rates. Those forecasts were nowhere near what actually happened for various reasons outside of our control. So we were earning higher interest and therefore higher income. Table 3 of the report sets out our actual borrowing that the council hold as at the end of March, and that was just shy of 273 million, which is split across the general fund and the housing revenue account. Table 4 sets out the council's total borrowing requirement, which is known as the capital financing requirement. And this is where it gets a bit technical. But to keep it simple, the council currently has a debt of around 490 million across the general fund and housing revenue account, of which 273 has an actual borrowing. The rest is what we refer to as internal borrowing. Now, it's a difficult concept to understand. Again, something we'll pick up in the training, but it's the best way to understand it is how like a mortgage offset account works. So the more cash that you've got, it offsets the debt that we carry. So table 5 of the report sets out the investments as at the end of March, which was just over 35 million. Now, the second part of the report focuses on the first quarter for 23-24, which will have quarterly updates throughout the course of the year. So we're currently forecasting in table 6 a surplus of 665,000, and again that is because of interest rates being much higher than when we actually came to set the budget back in February. Table 7 and Table 8 are the debt and borrowing positions, which the debt has not moved, or barely moved as at the end of March, but our investments stand at around 87 million. And cash tends to be higher at the council at the beginning part of the financial year, and then it sort of dwindles down throughout the year. So the last part I just want to focus on is in regards to paragraphs 29 and 34, which is the recommendation of the report to reduce the council's debt threshold. So as part of the setting of the 23-24 budget, the proposal that came to Audit and Governance and then on to council was to increase the council's debt threshold from 855 million to 1.3 billion. That move put the council in what we'd call the mid-range of upper tier authorities. So it was pushing the council in terms of its debt threshold higher than others of a similar size. The reason for the increase was to support the council's big plan objectives in terms of regeneration and housing investment. So you'll see on table 9, this is what was previously approved. So the increase went from 855 to 1.3 billion. Now, this approach has resulted in some concerns around the risk associated, one with the high level of debt and also the robustness and accountability for any of the business cases that come forward. So the recommendation of this report is now to reduce the debt back to 755 million. Which is based on the current committed level of approved capital strategy, with a tolerance allowance for any sort of one-offs that perhaps would come through. In terms of the actual risk associated, we only need to look at the councils that are currently going through financial issues, such as those raising Section 114, where their debt levels are significantly high. So how we manage debt as part of the council is something that's fundamental to the council's operations. I will just clarify that this proposal is not looking to reduce the ambition of the council in terms of its regeneration and housing strategy. It's just that business cases that come forward will go through greater scrutiny. So I'll stop there, Chair, and happily take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Filmer. I've got one quick question for you, but after that, I'll be calling on the portfolio holder to make any comments or observations that he wishes to make. Attached to your report, you referred to Appendix 1, but there's also Appendix 2, and I couldn't actually find which particular paragraph in your report that would link into. Appendix 2 being headed Approved Capital Schemes and Known Commitments.
Yes, so that's to give some, although I haven't referred to it, that gives an idea of what is actually committed as part of the debt threshold that we're looking to set. So it gives an idea for the committee the actual capital commitments that we've used to calculate that threshold amount.
Thank you. Can I call on Councillor Mike Cox?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think Matt summarised the position very well. This particular recommendation is a direct result of the new financial strategy that we've putting in place since May, and what the idea is to reduce risk for the council and to increase the overview and scrutiny over any particular capital items. So this will enable this committee to look into any particular increases that as a cabinet they may want to come up with, one particular venture or another, and it will give you much more scrutiny over the business case. So I think it's got two advantages. One being it reduces our risk, and secondly it increases the scrutiny that can be undertaken in any particular item. So I would strongly recommend it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I could throw it open to the floor. Probably questions initially, because obviously there are several new councillors here who may want to have some things explained to them. So any indications of questions? Councillor Colley.
I have questions, kick things off. Just to check my understanding. So given the rate rises of the last year and a half, my understanding is that the council's benefited from increased earnings on investments as a result, but shielded from the higher cost of borrowing because of higher cash balances. Is that something that we could expect in future years? Is that likely to be a pattern, or is that a one-off story for this year? You know, is that perhaps you could expand a little bit on the reason for the higher cash balances and whether similarly will be protected from the higher cost of borrowing in the next year?
Through you, Chair. So the answer is a little bit more. It's a little bit difficult. The cash balances that we've had in the council, particularly over the last couple of years, have been a bit of an anomaly because we've received significant grants from central government. So we've actually been in receipt of cash that perhaps we hadn't previously envisaged as part of our, we do long-term cash flow forecasts over a number of years. The cash of the council is reducing. There's no question around that. A policy has been to wind cash down because that's the cheaper option compared to borrowing. But we will have to carry out some quite significant borrowing over the next term. In terms of which rate that will be at, you know, that's we try and manage that and what risks we can try and take off the table in regards to that. But yeah, it's a tricky one. We do a lot of forecasting of cash, but I can't say with certainty where we're going to be with cash in the next couple of years, if you see what I mean, because of some of the nature of some of our cash flow.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got a query, Mr. Filmer, going back to Appendix 2. The first line in Appendix 2 is about Carter's Quay, where seemingly there's a commitment to expend £25.5 million by the end of this financial year. Linking into a question I did raise actually at full council about the fact that work has ceased on that site. Is that realistic to expect that that spend will actually occur in this financial year?
Through you, Chair. So what's in Appendix 2 is what's been agreed as part of our capital programme that went to the full council. That's the budget. In terms of the Carter's Quay project individually, I know there's discussions afoot in regards to that. I'm not sure I can perhaps comment. I don't know if anyone else in the room perhaps could comment on that individual case, perhaps a bit closer to it than I am in terms of its likelihood of spend.
I think Adam Richards is indicating.
Thank you, Chair. As Matt says, Appendix 2 is the budgeted position with regards to all these capital schemes. Clearly, we will be keeping that budget under review and considering the implications of any movements, either forward or backwards, with regards to those commitments to debt as shown within those tables. You identify Carter's Quay, and I think you're right with regards to the anticipation that there could be slippage in that programme and therefore in that expenditure. But then again, on other schemes, there might be a reprofiling forward. You know, I think the process is we keep it under constant review, and as part of, you know, further updates, we'll have that constant review as to whether or not any of those overall threshold potential indicators need to be changed as a result of any of that movement.
Thank you very much for that. Obviously, our next meeting is a date in October. I forget the precise date, but you know, potentially we might have an update generally about things, because obviously, in terms of the spend, you know, that is a large sum of money. Where, you know, if we don't have to expend it, then that would be well, news that we probably need to receive. Thank you. Yeah. So if there's no other questions or comments, can I thank Mr. Filmer for presenting? Councillor.
Sorry, it's not a question, it's just a comment. You did say just comments a minute ago. I just want to say that I am very pleased to see the reduction in the debt threshold. Very pleased indeed. When this went through previously last year, I didn't vote for it at this committee, although it did go committee, and so I'm absolutely delighted to see this. I think it is the way to go, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. You have on item 8 4 recommendations, essentially to note. Though item 4 in the recommendation is not only to note but to approve and recommend to the council. So can I have a proposer and a seconder for what the officer has set out, please? Councillor Phipps is indicating to propose.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose.
I'll second.
Councillor Colley seconding. So we don't have to have a vote on it. That goes through. Nobody indicating they want to abstain or anything like that. Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman. Because it's a recommendation to council at last. I wouldn't normally say that.
Thank you. Thank you for your advice. So can we all indicate by raising a hand that we approve the recommendation as set out, please? I'll be voting.
1, 2, unanimous.
Yes, that's unanimous for those listening in. Thank you. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 9, risk management, corporate risk register update. Basically, just to explain what this is all about, this report is to update councillors on the position of the council's corporate risk register. And the officer presenting this is Fiona Mannington, who is joining us online.
Manton.
Sorry, Manton, I apologise.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening. This is the quarterly update to the committee of the Council's Corporate Risk Register. This report outlines the changes in the Council's Corporate Risk Register during the quarter, with detail on any changes being provided in Appendix 1 of the report. In general terms, each of the Council's corporate risks is updated each quarter, and we give consideration to the following areas. We look at whether the risk title best describes the risk. We look at whether there are any additional mitigations that we need to note. We look at what future actions are planned in the near future, and we also provide provision in terms of an update for the risk for the quarter. As part of that review, we then look at the risk scoring and the overall risk strategy in place in terms of the treatment of the risk. To assist the committee, at paragraph 8 of the report, the material changes and updates are outlined. In summary, these include changes to risk CR4, previously titled Failure to Provide Adequate IT and Cybersecurity. This risk, the title has been updated to better articulate the risk, and this is now Failure to Provide IT and Cybersecurity. The next risk which we've updated materially during the quarter is risk CR8. This is the risk that routinely comes onto the corporate risk register and again is removed from the risk register when we are running any elections or referendum. This risk has been transferred back now to service level as we would usually do outside of an election period. The next risk which we've reviewed is CR11. This is the ability of the council to function and operate efficiently in the delivery of single services across the area of BCP. In considering this risk, we've reviewed it and de-escalated it down to a service level, which means that each service risk register is reviewed in the context of the risk to consider whether it's relevant to them, and they would then add it to their risk register. At risk CR14, continuity of public health arrangements, the title of this risk has also been updated and the risk is currently under review. This was a risk which was previously included on the risk register as part of our COVID response, and this is now being moved more into a business as usual pattern. And we'll update further as this risk is updated again. Finally, the further risk I wanted to draw to your attention was CR15. This risk is around the effective people strategy, and this risk has also been reviewed and updated, and the net score of the risk has been updated and increased as part of this quarter's review. In relation to the corporate risk register more generally, it continues to be reviewed routinely by CMB as part of the continuous dynamic review of risk. As a result of this review, We also consider whether any additional risks need to be included, and we also look at the risks in a collective manner to ensure that there are no additional features that we need to consider that would impact multiple risks. Thank you for the opportunity to present my report. If there are any questions I can assist with, I'm happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your report. I've heard from the chair, which are probably obvious to you in terms of what the question is. The numbering of these risks isn't consecutive. I think that's because some have dropped by the wayside. But on that basis, how do new risks get added? Is it a senior officer decision to add what is considered to be a new risk, or is it a member decision?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of new risks, they obviously evolve via officer discussion consideration. We continue to undertake horizon scanning of the environment in which we operate. So if there's changes in legislation or changes in the external environment, this may impact or develop new risks. On occasions, this committee has asked us to consider risks. The committee has nominated risks which we would review, consider and report back to the committee on.
Thank you for that. Again, as for the previous item, perhaps initially we can deal with any particular questions or clarification that members would like to raise with the officer. Can you introduce yourself?
Councillor Claire Waite. My question is about the effective people strategy. Sorry, I'm just not familiar. What is that? What was the risk and how has it changed?
Did you hear the question?
I did. Sorry, I'm just going to the risk for you. Apologies.
Sorry, no. That's fine. Look up the paper.
Yes. So this is risk CR15, and the risk is quite wide in its context. In its general sense, it is around the people strategy of the authority and its implementation. The reason that the risk has changed and increased during this quarter was the review that took into consideration the deferment of the pay and reward programme. So that element of the risk has caused and on reflection increased the net score, which is what's been reflected in this report.
Thank you for that. Any other queries or questions? Councillor Connolly.
I do, yeah, two quick ones. One, I personally think I would find it helpful to see the full corporate risk register in more granular detail, just to sort of see the history of some of those risks. I don't know if that's something that you would usually share with the committee, or if other members would find that useful as well. Is that something that could be achieved?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. This is the standard reporting mechanism. Obviously, the risks are very dynamic, so they do change quite routinely. We could probably put together a history over the last year if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you. Some of the risks have been there and the history of them, and to get us up to speed. My second question was about the risk related to the council managing an election. And it's a question more broadly about how we monitor risks once they fall below the corporate risk register to the service level. So, for example, I'm aware of some complaints made about the last election and lessons learned for future elections. And I'm just interested how that's going to continue to be monitored once it drops to the lower tier. If you could expand on that a little bit, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Each service area has a service risk register, and when a risk drops from the corporate risk register, we would arrange a meeting with the risk champion that has oversight of their service risk register, and we would go through if you like, the de-escalation of the risk with them, and anticipate then in our routine 3 monthly catch-ups with that service area to discuss any risks that are appearing on the register or are escalating in their scoring, if you like. So it's part of our routine review with services.
Thank you. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you, Chairman. CR9, balanced budget. We've still obviously got this dedicated schools grant deficit hanging over our heads. And I do recall from the last municipal year that this is likely to rise even more than it is at the moment, quite sharply. I think, I might remember, it was going to go up to about 60 odd million or something. It was going, yeah, exactly. Do we have any, I just wonder, or because this risk is extremely high, well, it's going to get higher, isn't it, really? It's just sitting there with no strategy that I'm aware of, or are we just waiting for the government to bail us out? I just wondered if we had any idea on this. Thank you very much.
I've got Adam's Richards indicating, so perhaps I'll pass to him first.
Chair, yeah, if I may come in at this point with regards to dedicated schools grant and provide a bit of an update, really, in the sense that with regards to a strategy, the council is currently part of something called the Delivering Better Value in SEND programme, and that is where we're working with the Department for Education on assessing the root causes for that deficit and establishing a programme and action plan as to how it can be addressed. However, that doesn't come with any money or any support. What we have, however, is just recently received an invitation to be part of the safety valve mechanism, which is the programme, if you like, that sits over the Delivering Better Value in SEND programme, and that programme is the one where there has been conversations with the department with regards to how that deficit is actually addressed. Clearly that's something for the council to consider the pros and cons of joining that process, and I'm sure it will be giving thought to that over the next few weeks. And I think in future reiterations of this risk, I will be able to provide an update as to where we are on that journey.
Thank you very much. I think that's a bit more reassuring, actually. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And Fiona, do you have anything to add, or is that okay?
Thank you, Chair. No, I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sarah Armstrong, I think you were indicating.
Yes, thank you. It's a question with regards to CR11, the ability of the council to function and operate efficiently with the delivery of single services across the area of BCP. I'm just wondering what systems are yet to be integrated.
Thank you for that. I do actually see that is marked as risk removed in first quarter 23, but I'll defer to the officer.
Thank you, Chair. I would have to go away and find out the answer to that and revert to you separately on that, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat that? We had a motorcycle going to that answer.
Oh, sorry. I don't actually have that information available. Could I come back and revert to you separately on that in due course?
Is that okay, Councillor? Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, Councillor Phipps indicating again.
Sorry. Just on CR19, it's to do with planning applications and the failure to determine them with statutory time scales. Obviously, we are within the time scales at the moment, so that's fine. But as you go down, it's got near future key actions. I know it's 3 to 6 months, but as far as I'm aware, obviously we're going to be setting up a constitution working group later. There's going to be consideration to changing the planning committee from 1 to 2. Do you think that should be noted in there as something we are doing or thinking of doing or considering? Thank you.
Any observations on that, Fiona?
I will certainly raise that with the risk lead and respond on that one for you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other queries or any debate? Basically, it is a recommendation that we've got here to note this report. So can we, unless there's any dissent, note the report, please? Okay, we're noting the report. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 10, it's the appointment or potential appointment of independent co-opted members to the Audit and Governance Committee. And on this particular one, without any further delay, I would refer the matter over to Nigel Stannard, who prepared the report. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, councillors. Just before I start on report 10, could I just make a sort of general comment? You will receive a lot of reports from me during the municipal year, and I generally adopt a less is more approach in terms of the verbal explanation to my reports. I think the report should stand alone almost. So I will point out key elements or useful context and background, but should the chair or any other members for that matter want me to slightly adjust that approach, please feel free to get in touch with me outside the meeting, and I'll take your views on board. So thank you for that opportunity, Chair. So moving on to report 10, I think the concept of independent members we discussed at our induction event back in June, and there seemed to be pretty universal support that it was a good thing. So what this paper tries to do is point out some of the local choices and decisions we need to make make that happen. I've made a number of recommendations which are supported by a rationale in my report. Of course, it is your prerogative to change those recommendations, but I do hope you'll be able to support most of them. What I suggest, Chair, is I'll quickly make comment through the decisions, and then I'll circle back, and then through you we can debate each one in turn if that's appropriate. So recommendation 1 is about how many co-opted members. In simple terms, we can have as many or as few as we like. However, it seems appropriate that we try and align ourselves with likely legislative requirements that are close to coming in, and that suggests 2 independent members. So that's my recommendation. Moving on to decision 2, we need to decide how long to appoint these independent members for. And I'm suggesting an initial 2-year period with a 2-year extension, if it's mutually agreeable. During the review process for this report, portfolio holder Councillor Cox has another view which I'll invite him to comment on later on. My recommendation is frankly around just giving the committee flexibility if the candidate maybe isn't quite what everybody was hoping they were. It just gives us that break clause, so to speak. So that's the broad rationale from me. In terms of decision 3, I'm suggesting an allowance of £1,084 per annum. Currently, an independent remuneration panel exists and has determined that figure for other independent members that BCP Council has, particularly on the Children's Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I think it would create issues for us if we differentiated without going through the remuneration panel, for the remuneration panel to come up with a rationale for a difference. So I'm suggesting that figure to start with, and then if the remuneration panel perceives a difference, then any changes can be backdated. And then finally, decision 4, to construct a shortlisting panel and an interview panel. and I'm suggesting that that's made up of 3 members of this committee, the chair and 2 others, and maybe we could seek volunteers this evening for that. There are a couple of other housekeeping recommendations in the report, Chair, which we can circle back to, but I'm happy to take any comments or questions in order, perhaps.
Thank you for that. Can I bring in Councillor Cox, because you mentioned him having a view on this. So, Mike, would you like to comment? Thank you.
Thank you. I welcome Nigel's report, and we've had a bit of a discussion about it in all the points, and we generally agree on everything. My suggestion was that the length of term is made different from the election cycle, so that you can have so that people who are on a committee are still there after the election. We've all seen what happened in the last election. That there could be a bit of a wipeout in terms of historical knowledge on a particular committee, and if we kept the independents on a different cycle to the election cycle, then that might add some stability to the committee. And this is one of those committees where it would be, very important to maintain some historical knowledge. And so, I felt that maybe initially 2 years, that's fine, but then after that, 4 years, so that it was out of kilter with the election cycle. So that would be my suggestion. But I'm not going to die in a ditch over it, but I just think it would be better for stability.
Thank you. And generally, apart from that, you're generally happy with the recommendation as set out?
Other than that, I'm very happy with the recommendation I set out. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other councillor like to make comments or observations, please? Councillor Phipps.
I welcome this. I think we should have independent members. And I remember last year I did actually mention this to the chief executive at one point, and I think it is a good thing. So I'm glad we're doing it. In terms of the amount of years, certainly I think we should start with 2, because I think you're absolutely right. Let's see how it works out. But whether then you went for 4 years, I don't know, maybe 3, I don't know. I can see what you mean though about the cycle, whether another 4 is too much, or do you just change it that 2 years with an option to be agreed after 2 years as to what the next term is? I don't know. Just a thought anyway. Thank you.
Councillor Chapman-Law.
Yeah, I mean, how quickly are they going to be instated? Because I mean, we could be looking at 6 months or so, which will then put them a year more or less out of sync anyway. So would the 2 years, it would then be out of sync with the election cycle anyway, wouldn't it?
I'll perhaps ask Mr. Stanhope whether the 2 years is going to be backdated to the 5th of May.
My suggestion, Chair, would be to round up or down the 2 years on the first appointment. So let's say we appoint in October, we would probably make the first appointment either a 30-month or a 18-month, our choice, I guess. So we go a little bit lower than 2 years or a little bit higher than 2 years to align ourselves to the municipal cycle of the committee.
Okay. It would appear the only item which people, or one Councillor Cox is dissenting to or not agreeing to, is the actual length of term. It would appear that there be consensus about independent persons. The only committee that has independent persons at the moment is the Standards Committee, which I have been on previously. And in fact, obviously, during our public meetings, they do contribute, but not much. But behind the scenes, the independent persons have been very valuable in terms of knowledge and assistance to the Standards Committee. And it is a breath of fresh air sometimes to get somebody outside the organisation to make comments and observations. Obviously, they have no voting rights. But in terms of whether independent persons is a good thing, I might actually be asking Councillor Beasley to make a comment, because correct me if I'm wrong, I think historically on Bournemouth Borough Council, for the sort of similar committee that did the function that this committee did, they did have independent persons, and in fact I think one of the independent persons even ended up chairing the committee.
If you'd like me to comment, Chairman, I'm fully supportive of Mr. Stannard's paper. That's the first thing I should say. And I think it's really important that we take into account the comments that have been made about that first term, because I think that affects the handover into the next council in any case, without actually changing what's in his report. In terms of the former Bournemouth Council, yes, we did have an independent member appointed, perhaps not completely within the criteria that is being highlighted by Mr. Stannard, in so much as it was a former councillor whose time wasn't spent in terms of the period between ceasing to be a councillor and taking up the role. But it was because there was a very significant one-party majority, and this particular member was from another party. So it seemed appropriate to bring somebody in who had that knowledge and experience. And you are right, Chairman, he ended up chairing Audit and Governance, and did so, I think, achieving all of the outcomes that we were looking for, particularly in terms of that independence and his ability to do that. One of the criteria was that he was an FCA, so he was professionally qualified in the appropriate field, so it fitted in extremely well. And I would recommend the report to all members here this evening.
Thank you for that. Is there any other contributions? Councillor Harriott.
I'd just like to echo that I'm supportive of independent members on the committee. And also, if that first term were, say, 30 months from October, it means that we end up in a cycle of, a 2-year overlap with our election cycle. And that would seem sensible to me.
So just to clarify, you would prefer the 2 years to start from the date of appointment later this year?
No. So the first term would be, say, I think 30 months was muted so that it stayed a year either side of our election cycle.
Okay. We're obviously to progress it, we're going to have to decide on what is the right thing. Councillor Connolly?
Yes, I completely agree. I think if we stagger it so that the 2 years, as long as they fall over the other election, then I think both can be met. So 2 years commencing from next May. Yeah, I think that would square it off. I'd support that.
That's probably a prudent thing to do, because obviously, even if there's not, let's say, a political change of running the council, there's a big personnel change. Having people who've been as independent members assisting the committee, helping at meetings, might actually assist the new councillors in whatever date the next elections are going to be. One thing that Mr. Stannard did mention during his presentation is that he would actually like to see whether we can have some volunteers this evening. In the recommendation we got there, I'm penciled in as one of the 3. I did actually have one person prior to the meeting indicating that they might be interested. Councillor Harriott. So I think we do need a third person potentially this evening. So that would be good, because then if we've got this 3 appointed effectively this evening, then we can progress sooner rather than later the appointment of the independent members. So I have a third nominee. Yeah, we're looking for volunteers. We're not looking for you to get nominated. Councillor Chapman-Law, you're willing to be the third person?
Yes, I shall volunteer.
Okay, that's fine. So if you could pencil in those 3 names. So do we need to fine-tune the recommendation so it reflects what the consensus of opinion is, that the 2, perhaps Mr. Stannard can assist on this. So item 2, where you say they run for an initial 2 years, how do we need to change that so it starts? The intention is that it will start immediately, but progress for 2 years from May of next year.
Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Chair. So I think that's the wording.
So if you can make the appropriate amendment to the recommendation there, which is just an additional few extra 2 or 3 words. And I don't think we need to take a formal vote on this unless there's any dissension to the recommendation. We're happy with that. Thank you. Item 11 on the agenda is the internal audit for the first quarter 23-24 audit plan update. Mr. Stannard, I think again you're presenting this particular paper to us. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you again, Chair. Yeah, this is a report you will receive at every core quarterly meeting, I should say, and it will give you the information of the work conducted by the Council's internal audit team for the quarter in question. In this particular report, there is strong reference back to the original audit plan and how recruitment issues have impacted the plan. Summarised in the table at page 80, the report explains that we're adopting quite an aggressive apprenticeship programme to address the issues presenting to us, the most significant of which is simply a lack of auditors in the market. That's been proven by failed recruitment initiatives and liaison with agencies. You might be incidentally useful to know, research conducted by the Institute of Internal Auditors has estimated that there are 21% less auditors in England and Wales than there were before COVID. And that's a result of older auditors retiring, sometimes early, and not being replaced at the same rate by new or younger auditors. Once again, I've had a chat with Councillor Cox about this, who you may know runs a private sector audit firm, and this phenomenon is no means just to the public sector. Councillor Cox, I think, in his private sector work is experiencing something very similar. So back to BCP, this of course does have an impact on what internal audit can achieve and deliver, and paragraphs 11 and 12 on page 81 of this report explain that in a bit more detail. Elsewhere in the report, I explain the audit work fully completed in Q1, and as required by the committee and as agreed by the audit charter, where we've given a partial audit opinion, there is a bit more detail on the key issues found. This is shown at paragraph 14 for the audit that was adult social care brokerage. Could I also bring your attention to paragraph 22? This explains an audit investigation requested by the Chief Operations Officer, Jess Gibbons. This investigation was into the arrangements for operating pop-up and temporary activities incorporating Bayside Restaurant, and you may recall that's a venture where the council sustained some financial losses of about £175,000. This investigation is ongoing, so if you can give officers the time and the space to conclude the investigation, that would be greatly appreciated, and we will bring a full summary back to the next meeting on the issues there. Please also note on paragraph 23 and appendix 1, this is a new feature following a change this year to the audit charter that this committee made. This shows for all high recommendations where the original agreed implementation dates have passed or slipped, and there's an explanation why from the relevant service director or their representative, and the estimated new date of implementation is also included. please note paragraph 25. If you as a committee remain unconvinced or you require further explanation, you can request that the director in question either provide something in writing or can even attend the next audit and governance meeting should you consider this necessary. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there and ask for any questions.
Initially, are there any questions for Mr. Stannard, Mr. Chapman?
Yeah, to do with Bayside, I think with the massive loss that we saw there, and just from the public information that we've had, the numbers aren't adding up to me, and I would really like to see the full report, not just the summary.
Mr. Stannard?
Just referring to my verbal explanation, I think if we could conclude the report, conclude the investigation, but at the end of that, there's no reason why I can see that the committee can see the full report. No problem at all.
So this is actually going to be on the agenda for the October meeting.
Yes.
Yes. And obviously, I don't know how the debate or discussion will go. If necessary, if we have to go below the line, we have to go below the line. But it's definitely going to be on the October meeting, so it will be given a good airing at that meeting. Councillor.
Thank you.
What I would suggest, Chair, is that the October meeting probably still receives a summary, but I can definitely furnish the committee with the full report if they so desire outside of the meeting.
Thank you for that. Councillor Cox, not so much on that. You were mentioned in the report about the problems of recruiting staff, and I suppose you can echo that. And I think obviously the planning department's lots of professional people. It's difficult with recruiting staff at the moment.
I can definitely echo those comments and say that Nigel's absolutely right. It's bad enough in private sector. It must be even worse, I suspect, in the public sector. But I do think Nigel's taken some very aggressive steps in order to sort this out with the apprentices. I think that's an excellent idea, and we should welcome that, certainly. That'll be a good step forward.
Thank you for that. Is there any other? Councillor Phipps?
I'm just looking on page 80. I've read this right in this table, that we've had the addition of core audit apprentices, and this is quite good. Obviously, you're taking on people, but then down at the bottom, obviously, there's a lot of training time. So there's time out, isn't there? Because you've got to train them. So have we got anything within their agreements, contracts, or employment that they actually stay with us once they're trained, or how does that work? Because, you know, we're obviously, there's a lot of time out there to train them. Then if they're trained, then they thank you and good night, you know, they're gone. Well, do they have to stay with us for a while? Can you tell me how that works, or if it works like that?
You're absolutely right, Councillor Phipps. It is a dilemma, and for apprentices in particular, we're not allowed to tie people into, you know, binding contracts. You've got to stay with the council for 2 years after you just can't do it to access the government levy. So we can do it with other trainee roles, and we do. Where we provide professional training, for example, the Institute of Internal Auditors. If I put an auditor through that, I would tie them into a period of working for the council after that comes, and people do sign up to that. But we can't do it for apprentices, I'm afraid.
Councillor Connolly.
I'm just looking again at the table on page 80. It looks like the loss of the resources of the auditor and audit assistant for a whole year seems to fall disproportionately on the high level risks, and I'm wondering to what extent there's capacity to perhaps rearrange where people are working such that high level risks isn't as affected? You know, perhaps there are lesser risks which might receive less hours instead.
Thank you, Councillor. Column B is the deduction as a result of losing the two auditors that are in the establishment. So that's a statement of fact. What I'm reluctant to do, I think, is to try and expect too much of an apprentice, that they can just roll into a high level risk environment and try and audit there. So I'm trying to be realistic there and accept that there's going to be quite a steep learning curve, and there's going to be you know, limited things that people can do straight away, and that's why that there is a bit of a trade-off there, I'm afraid.
Thank you for that. One thing, obviously, to try and get more staff, not only in financial matters and generally, is obviously work experience. I know this is a personnel query or question for you, Mr. Stannard, but you know, does this council actively encourage sixth formers on work experience during the summer months? Because if we can get some people from, you know, the various colleges and schools in this area to come here actively, work experience in various departments, that might actually give them the flavour of entering the profession of accountancy or planning or building surveying. Do we actually actively encourage students for work experience?
Thank you, Chairman. I can't give you any exact numbers, but certainly from experience of requests that we get from HR, you know, can you support a placement over the summer holidays or longer? And wherever possible, we try to accommodate those requests. So from that perspective, I can confirm the council does do that.
Oh, Councillor Cox, you're indicating. Sorry, I missed that.
It's okay. No, I think that question from Councillor Colony, was it, was very good, and I think it's a fair point. But I would back up Nigel's answer and say that's I would prefer personally that the key financial systems and the key assurance functions, particularly, and the fraud risks were maintained as much as possible. So I think the balance which Nigel struck there is probably about right. So, but good question. I liked it.
Okay, thank you for that. The report is again something to note. So you've got the recommendations to note all the items there. So if we can accept and note the report, and on that basis we can move on to the next item, which is item 12. Which is the annual review of declarations of interests, gifts and hospitality by officers for 2022-23. And again, Mr. Stannard, you're presenting this report.
Thank you again, Chair. So just before we dive into agenda item 12, the next 5 items actually are all annual reports on specific areas and topics where A&G committee have got responsibilities to consider the adequacy of arrangements, and in many ways they are like building blocks ready for you to consider the annual governance statement later in the agenda at item 16. So yeah, think of these reports as assuring you more and more and more up to the annual governance statement. So agenda item 12 is broken down into 2 key elements, really. Part 1 is a reminder about the annual review or evolution of the policy that this committee agrees on an annual basis, and that's all explained in paragraphs 4 to 8. And then part 2 summarises the work undertaken by internal audit to test the adequacy of the arrangements and compliance across the council with policy. I just want to explain 2 paragraphs, if I may, in a bit more detail. So paragraph 9 talks about the NFI, or the National Fraud Initiative. That's a big data matching exercise which is statutory and all local authorities participate. And we supply, for example, our payroll data, our creditors data, and then it goes into the government sausage machine, and there's a big data matching, and they point out some risks where there's certain that may indicate fraud, and we're asked to go through those and check them. That's a process that happens with declarations of interest, and we do that. And Councillor Cox asked a question again through the review processes. Does that also apply to members? This report isn't about members, but that NFI data matching is also does also include members for information. So then moving on to paragraph 10, I just thought I'd explain the base declaration process in BCP Council. So policy requires is that all tier 4 and above officers must complete a declaration, even if the declaration is nil, and that becomes what's called the base declaration. So it's not an annual thing, it's a base declaration which only needs updating as and when the officer perceives new declarations need to go and come off. Finally, I just did a hot off the press check this morning, and in terms of updating paragraph 10, there's about 120 officers in the council falling into that tier 2 and above category, and there are 4 returns outstanding and out of the 120, and they are being chased as we speak, and we won't rest until they're in. So I hope that gives committee assurance there, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. I've got one which I'll throw in your direction. Obviously, this is talking about gifts and hospitality, everything like that. What if the senior officer is offered some hospitality and no, hey, they turn it down? Do they still have to report that?
Yeah, good question, Chair. The policy sets a threshold of £25. So if a gift is declined over £25, it must still be recorded and declared. If the gift is below £25 and declined, it does not need to be recorded.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Cox, you were mentioning Mr. Stanhope's presentation. Do you have any comments or queries?
No, I think I think Nigel's already said what my comments when I did the review on this, and I did feel that members, actually senior members, I'm thinking of committee chairs and the cabinet, should go through a fairly rigorous process, as well as officers. So I think there was certainly an element of where that I think Nigel was telling me that members are not subject to the same process, and actually I think they should be, particularly as I say, cabinet members and committee chairs. So I would be looking to strengthen any processes where we could do in this area, so that the general public have as much confidence as possible that everything is above board. I think when I met Nigel, there was a significant number that was still outstanding in terms of the declarations. I'm delighted to see it's down to 4 now, so I just think we need to push on this subject as much as possible, because I think this is one of the areas that certainly from the general public's point of view, they can make a lot of noise about. So
thank you for that. Again, this is a report to note, so if there's no further queries or questions, Mr. Jones.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just to come back on the point Councillor Cox has just made, just to remind members that they are obliged to abide with the code of conduct, and that's got a specific section in there on gifts and hospitality. And all councillors are required to register with the monitoring officer any gift or hospitality with an estimated value of at least it's £50 for councillors within 28 days of the receipt. And in terms of register of interests, councillors are also required to update their register within 28 days of any change to their register of interest details. That is a requirement of the Localism Act and the Code of Conduct.
Thank you for that
clarification. Can I just come back on that a minute, Marcus?
Yep, go away.
And I just wanted Nigel to confirm, because I thought there was an element where members were not as rigorously looked after in that respect as officers. Because I do remember a conversation I had with Nigel about bringing cabinet members and chairs into it. So maybe he can remind me of the conversation which took place a few weeks ago.
Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I confirmed to Councillor Cox is that internal audit do not do the in-depth analysis like we do for officers to members, because of the fact that members' declarations are online. There's a degree of self-policing, there's a degree of transparency in terms of the public making the council aware of things. So that's sort of a rationale, but I do accept that internal audit could do more, but the value of that, I think, is somewhat limited.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Sarah Armstrong.
Thank you. It's a question about mandatory training. It's on point 7 on page 94 about the completion of mandatory training by all employees, particularly in the fraud awareness module. I'm just wondering if you have anything to report on that in terms of rollout and how successful that has been.
Bear with me, Councillor, while I just get to that section. Could you just tell me where that was again, please? Sorry.
Page 94, paragraph 7, I think.
Thank you. Yep, got it. Yep, thank you. Yeah, it's the council's got a new mandatory training approach now, linked to a corporate system, a better corporate system that we've got. And what that system does is, if a employee has not done the mandatory training, it keeps firing emails at that individual as reminders, and their line managers have a dashboard to be able to notice that their employee has not done it. So there's a two-pronged attack, really. Both the employee gets something and the manager, and that is certainly leading to a much better completion rate. We're still not, swept through the council yet by any means, but it's steady progress.
Okay, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Jim. Just to confirm, that's just a conversation I was having with Sarah Radine, Director of People and Culture, yesterday, and we have a plan in place so that during August we make sure that all the data is absolutely clean, and then from September we're really going to drive mandatory training so that by the end of this year we've got a much better performance than we've currently got. I think it is critical.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Again, it's a report to note, so if we can note that one, and then we can move on to the next item, which I think is items 13. Use of Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and Investigatory Powers Act Annual Report. Again, Mr. Stannard, you have quite a few reports this evening. Over to you again.
Chair. Yeah, so this report is a best practice annual report, and it outlines to Audit and Governance Committee that the council has not used RIPA or IPA powers, and we have submitted an annual nil return to the IPCO, the Investigatory Powers Commission's office, accordingly. I hope the report very much stands alone and is self-explanatory. So what I thought would be useful is if I just give some examples and a bit of further background. I guess the ultimate is to try and give committee assurance that by not using RIPA, BCP isn't like missing a trick or we're taking in the easy road. So that's what I'm going to try and help get across. So last year, the senior responsible officer, who is the Director of Law and Governance, Susan Zeiss, organised some very effective and insightful training for about 25 to 30 BCP officers on RIPA and IPA. Consequently, these officers are very well equipped to understand the law and the detailed requirements. And paragraph 9 explains that RIPA powers should only be invoked as a last resort, and wherever possible, we should try to do surveillance or covert surveillance in other ways. Proportionality is also a big factor, and generally speaking, RIPA powers should only be used in cases where a custodial sentence of 6 months or more is likely to result. So in terms of the services within the council where those 25 or 30 officers sit, and give you a flavour for the services that may need to consider RIPA. We've got regulatory services in particular, so they, test purchasing of cigarettes and fireworks to children, for example, fly tipping, and then generally other trading standards issues. Often those are with other agencies because of that crime threshold that I talked about. Quite often the police, border force or HMRC would lead on the operation, and therefore they would get the RIPA authorization, and then BCP would be involved in the police or the respective agency operation. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. But basically what I think we were saying here is it's something that we annually have to note and receive a report as to whether or not we've actually used these powers. That's why the report is here. To some extent, hopefully, we don't have to use those powers, but it's another report to note, ladies and gentlemen. So if we can note the report, thank you. We're now moving on to item 14, which is headed Annual Breaches and Approved Waivers of Financial Regulations Report. And again, as it says, it's the annual report, so it will be coming to us this time roughly next year as well. So, Mr. Stannard, again, can you present your report?
Thank you again, Chair. So before we dig into this report, just some real simple basics. Breaches are bad. We don't want to see them. And why are they bad? Well, financial regs gives the council the best chance of achieving efficient, effective procurement at best price or best value, and least chance of complaints or challenges from the government, from suppliers who have not had or don't perceive they've been had a fair and open, transparent opportunity to access council contracts. Approved waivers are good. They demonstrate the council's good governance, good awareness of the flexibilities afforded to the council's commissioners and procuring officers in certain allowable circumstances. It's also worth me, I think, giving committee my personal and professional assurance that this report is full and frank. Nothing's hidden. Absolutely the case. So turning to breaches, first of all. So having said breaches are a bad thing and we don't want to see them, we do have to balance that with some context. BCP Council spends about £500 million per annum on works, goods and services with third parties. So the 11 breaches in 22-23 totaling 1.2 million is about 1/5 of 1% of our annual. There's quite a difficult balance to strike here between reluctantly accepting a small number of breaches and being complacent. I do accept that. But as Chief Internal Auditor, I would be suspicious and surprised if we reported no breaches. And I would think probably our reporting arrangements were not strong if we didn't find any. The 11 breaches that we have identified this year are discussed item by item on pages 103, 104 and 105 respectively. In terms of the internal process that happens when a breach either by service, by internal audit or other means, a breach report is produced. That's the responsibility of the service director. And within that breach report, there's an explanation of why did it occur, what are the lessons learned, and what actions are we going to do to prevent that breach happening again. That happens for every breach, and those reports exist. I can show you a template or show you an example if you need to. So moving on to waivers, they're tabled in summary at paragraph 12 on page 106 of the report, and then shown in a item by item detail in appendix 1. You may see in the table on page 106 that we have created a split between limited suppliers could not invite 3 quotes and limited supplier did not invite 3 quotes. That was a request by this committee this time last year when we had this report. We didn't have that split last year. And if I could just explain the difference, could not, usually in cases where we've got compatibility issues with existing items of spend, or where existing suppliers are asked to continue providing a service pending, say, transformation or retendering exercise. Did not, however, is usually in cases where we go out to quote or tender, we ask for 5 quotes with a view of getting 3 back, but for whatever reason we only get, say, 1 or 2 suppliers returning those quotes. So we've got a choice there. We could go looking for more and more quotes until we get up to the magic 3, but because of reasons of urgency or other factors, commissioning officers, seek a waiver to conclude the process a bit more swiftly. A common scenario we have there is where a company tell us they have orders or exceeding their current internal capability or their supply chain capability, so they will not quote unless the council's timescales shift considerably. So that's just a everyday occurrence that I thought would be useful for you to see in context there. So happy again to take any questions on this item, Chair.
Thank you for that. Looking around the room, anybody's got any queries or questions? I do know from my own personal experience that prior to joining this council, yes, we as a firm did get invitations from the predecessor councils to quote on various things to do, and some were very tight time scales and some were outside our expertise. And clearly we would like to try and offer contracts to local firms, but sometimes the timescales are impossible. So I can understand why there can be these breaches or waivers. So Councillor Phipps, I think you're indicating.
Yeah, it's just a comment really on page 105. You've got the destination and culture breach, 425,000. That's a hell of a lot as a breach. All the others didn't, obviously they're breaches, but that just sort of stands out. And I notice on that one, you're saying a further update will be presented. Yeah, so obviously realise. Have you any idea when this one might be concluded and what will come? What will come back to us? Is this a full report or a summary, or what's the process, please?
Yeah, I'll look to my colleague Jess Gibbons in a sec, but as I understand it, there is an investigation ongoing. I propose to report the outcome of that in my next quarterly update to this committee in October, but whether Jess wants to add anything to that.
No, I think, hi, I'm Jess Gibbons, Chief Operations Officer. The investigation is ongoing into this in terms of that, and we will report back once that is complete.
And there's a general observation, I think I probably know the answer, that obviously with these breaches and waivers which occur, and there will be more, as you said, there will be some next year as well. Hopefully lessons are being learnt at the top level and obviously being filtered down to the lower levels, so that we can hopefully move in the right direction where the numerical number is reduced. Yeah,
I agree, that's the aspiration, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Herrick.
Just a nod to Appendix 1 and the waivers for what appears to be the Bayside operation, the summer hospitality provision at Bournemouth Beach. Is that an explanation going to come with the report in October?
Sorry, Councillor, I got a vehicle in my ear. I couldn't quite hear what you said there.
So Appendix 1 for this item features quite a lot of catering services for summer hospitality provision at Bournemouth Beach, drink supplies for summer hospitality provision at Bournemouth Beach, which, making the leap suggests that it's the Bayside report that we referred to earlier. As part of the report that we're expecting in October, will we kind of get further information on those, or can I ask about them here?
Thank you. Through you, Chair.
Yes, carry on.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, you're correct. There is wider catering operations there rather than just Bayside. And remember, these are approved waivers. So this is where a combination of the head of strategic procurement and the chief finance officer's representative agrees that these waivers are reasonable. They may or may not feature in the investigation. I couldn't say with certainty at this point.
Yeah, as you said earlier, the report is ongoing and is being finalised, and we'll hear more in October. So this is another report to note. So if we can note it and move on to item 50. Oh, Councillor Cox, I miss you again. Thank you, Vice Chairman.
Thanks, Marcus. Yeah, the comments I had regarding this really was that again, I think we need to be a bit harder on this kind of stuff. In terms of the waivers, I certainly felt that if waivers were made, there certainly should not be any what's the word, declarations of interest. So if there was a member of staff, particularly a member of staff who might be involved in a company and who are involved in that particular procurement, should not have, and that should be highlighted if they were. And so therefore I did feel that in terms of breaches, if there was a breach, I felt that we should highlight who the breach was, and that should stand against as a matter of note that that particular officer had breached that particular I'm not suggesting everybody makes mistakes, and therefore, I'm not suggesting that we make take action. But if there is a pattern with any particular officer, we should know about it, and that should be highlighted. And so, I do feel that we need to be a bit stronger at this against this sort of stuff to act as a deterrent. And so, I would like to see certainly where there is a breach that the officer, that made the breach is identified, and that where there is waivers, we need to make sure that there is absolutely no possibility that there was any connection with anybody in the council, whether that be an officer or a member.
Mr. Stanley, can you respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Couple of things there. Where there are breaches, that is part of the breach investigation to understand if any of what Councillor Cox has alluded to there exists. I think it would be inappropriate to name individual officers. At the end of the day, the service director for that particular service area is responsible for the procurement in their respective areas. So they are the responsible officer, in my view, in that instance. What I can reassure Councillor Cox is that of the 11 breaches in this particular report, there are no multiple offenders, if that's the right phrase. They're all individual, different individuals, and the errors were made in good faith almost. They're not, I don't care what the financial regulations are, I'm doing it this way. It's as a result of not being aware of certain requirements.
So effectively you are monitoring them, and you say there's no particular trend. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Armstrong?
It's just to follow up on that, given that in 2021-22 there were 4 breaches, and this year we're saying that there's now 11. That's quite an increase. And looking through some of the explanations, it does sound like perhaps there's some training requirements there. So can you provide some further information about that, but also what progress has been made on the corporate landlord model that you're saying that because in housing there were 5 breaches. So that's looks like that's an area that needs some support.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Yes, again, Councillor, good questions and good points well made. In the report, I do state that we are going through a sort of training programme, and indeed there's an example where in one of Jess's areas, commercial operations, I've already delivered a training session to the procuring officers in that particular service area, and the aspiration is to drift that out through the council. I've already done several areas, housing, communities, and as commercial, as I say, but certainly the aspiration is to go wider. But I've hit priorities first. I've used where these breaches have occurred and said, okay, we need to target those areas first. So that was the reason for that approach. And then in terms of the corporate landlord model, could I pass to my colleague Adam, who may have a better response?
So with regards to the corporate landlord model, as part of the leadership restructure that took place in February, March of this year, the council has implemented a virtual landlord model, which has drawn a significant amount of related services together within the area of operations. Estates is still within finance, but together we are working through the delivery of the asset management plan, and that includes, as part of those actions, making sure that we have consistent policies and practices, all areas of the council where they're undertaking similar activities. So hopefully that will ensure that going forward, we create a lot more consistency with regards to the way we procure, engage contractors with regards to those similar kind of services.
Okay, so can we note the report as per the recommendation, item 15? Thank you. We move on to item 16, annual governance statement and the annual review of the local code of governance. Mr. Stannard, thank you.
Sorry, Chair, I think you may have missed agenda item 15.
Thank you. Item 15, thank you. Chief Internal Auditor's Annual Opinion Report 2022-2023. Mr. Stannard, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the public sector internal audit standards require me to formally report annually on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control environment and to offer a formal opinion. That said, this report is essentially a consolidation and summary of everything that's been reported to this committee throughout the year by me and others through the quarterly updates and other agenda items. My core opinion is shown in the executive summary and in paragraph 4 of my report, which is shown at Appendix 1. Simplified, it is my opinion that BCP Council has in place an adequate and effective framework of governance, risk management and internal control. Of course, that overall opinion does not mean everything is perfect, and there are areas of control weaknesses and non-compliance. We've just talked about a couple of those areas in breaches, for example, and non-compliance with policies. But internal audit have made recommendations accordingly to correct or improve those issues, and service managers have agreed in 100% of circumstances to implement those recommendations. These have all been drawn out in the various A&G committee reports throughout the year. The partial audit opinion are again highlighted as best practice suggests to do so, and they are shown in table 10, paragraph 10 in the table on that paragraph number. My report also details how internal audit has demonstrated compliance with professional standards, and that's shown at paragraphs 39 to 45. It should be remembered that BCP Council's internal audit team was subject to external assessment by CIPFA in 21-22. The latter part of that year, it was actually in the 22 calendar year. And the conclusion was the team fully complies with the public sector internal audit standards. That answers the question of who audits the auditor almost. I don't get this opportunity to do this very often, and especially not in a public setting. So I would hope the committee would let me just say a big thank you to my team for their tremendous hard work, their unwavering individual commitment to ethical and professional responsibilities, to the wider audit profession, to BCP councils, to council, and upholding the Nolan principles. Thank you. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Stannard. Yes, obviously, you know, the merging of 3/4 councils has been a big task, and auditing that whole process has probably been even a bigger task. So I think the staff are doing very well on the auditing team. Any comments or queries or questions? Councillor Connolly? Oh, sorry, Mike Cox, portfolio holder, you indicated.
No, I just wanted to echo the last comments of Nigel. You know, I think the team do a very good job, and they do a very good job because they've got a very good boss, and Nigel does a cracking job on behalf of BCP. So I think we should echo those comments about Nigel himself. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, it's a report to note. Oh, Councillor Colley, you want to comment?
Just a quick question, going back to the discussion about labour market and the difficulty in finding auditors. Do you have an idea of what level of staffing shortages you would consider there to be a problem in the strength of the function itself? Now, at what point would you think that there would actually you'd be worried about the robustness of the assurance and the size of the function? I assume we're not nearly there yet, but is that something you're thinking about?
Again, an excellent question, and I sort of responded to that more so in my earlier report. It's definitely an elephant in the room question. I've obviously got professional and technical responsibilities, not just to BCP, but to my institute. And it is a definite worry for me that, you know, we may not be able to do the amount of work, the quality of work for me to give this opinion this time next year. But in many ways, it's quite exciting as well, because, you know, anybody can order, you know, in good times, you know, money no object, you know, you earn your money and you earn your corn when things aren't so rosy. So that's the way I look at it.
Thank you for your response. As I said earlier, Councillor.
Yes, regarding recruitment, is it as difficult to find self-employed / contractor auditors as it would be to fill an employed position, and has that option been considered?
Thank you. Again, a good question. We have used 2 agency auditors in the last 12 months. And again, I've discussed this with Councillor Cox. Quite frankly, then they're not good for the amount of money that you pay. You have to pay silly sums to get average auditors. And I just made the judgment that I'm not willing to pay. I don't think BCP should be paying that silly money for not good staff. So that's hence why we've gone down this apprentice route.
Okay, we note the report, if you wouldn't, and we accept it. So we're moving on to item 16, which is the annual governance statement and the annual review of the local code of governance. Mr. Stanwell will draw it out in his presentation, but there are some bullet points on the actual agenda sheet itself, listing, I think, 5 significant governance issues. So, Mr. Stanwell, can you present your report, please?
Thank you again, Chair. So this is the pre-audited annual governance statement before you tonight, and it's been produced as a product of extensive assurance gathering processes. And these are detailed in paragraph 9 on page 131 of our packs. The AGS itself was included in the draft statement of accounts, which was made available for the statutory public inspection period, which commenced on or around about the 1st of June and lasted for 6 weeks. To date, no public comments have been received on the AGS specifically, although I do know a member of the public has indicated they may wish to do so. The annual governance statement is based on the collective evidence-based judgment of the Council's senior staffing and leadership group. Whilst the content is a matter of judgment, it is subject to external audit by Grant Thornton, as it is a component of the Council's statement of accounts, which they audit. External audit will therefore have an opinion on its reasonableness and the judgments we've made. The pre-audited AGS can be changed by the Council up to the point the external auditors sign off the statement of accounts. And indeed, we have a statutory duty to inform the auditor that we have considered the need to amend or update right up to that sign-off date. So if that is required, the AGS will be returned to this committee for awareness and approval And in the past, that's usually been the agenda item immediately before the statement of accounts when you come to approve that later in the year. Just a couple of key reminders. The annual governance statement should demonstrate the council is self-aware of matters where significant governance weaknesses exist or where improvements can be made. This is distinct from issues or risks that may exist, but are not caused or impacted by governance. So, for example, we could be having quite a significant risk, but that risk doesn't have any particular governance implications. Finally, please note the Chief Executive conducted an assurance review which is shown at Annex 1 to the Annual Governance Statement. It was agreed by the Corporate Management Board to use the existing annual governance process to ensure the governance matters identified by the Chief Exec are reported and followed up with the Audit and Governance Committee as per its terms of reference. So moving on to the review of the local code of governance on page 185. This is a map, if you like, of how the council demonstrates good governance, linking back to the international framework diagram, which is the circle on page 186. So we use the same colour coding as that diagram for the remaining sections of our local code, BCP Council's local code, to map the governance in place in BCP Council to achieve the 7 principles of good governance. In practice, this is an ever-evolving document, and I'm guessing with a new administration, it may be the case that some of these governance elements may change as the new administration might, for example, create new models, new groups, new boards to manage the council's activity. So happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you. Can I bring in Mike Cox, who is the new finance portfolio holder, if you've got any general observations to make about this particular report?
I think it's a good report. I've as I obviously was on this committee before, I've always had a significant issue with this particular statement, because of the name of it itself, a governance statement, and I have felt over the years that there has been flaws in our governance at BCP, but I think those flaws, those weaknesses, need to be addressed, but I'm very hopeful that they will be addressed in the constitutional working group, because I do feel that the governance of BCP was taken advantage of in the last few years, and much to the detriment of the reputation of BCP, and we need to therefore strengthen, if only we need to strengthen the perception of governance in BCP. Now, I appreciate, as Nigel set out there, there's an awful lot of work goes in, and there's an awful lot of controls in place, where the governance is good, and clearly people and officers and members, have stood up, but we've. If we look back, there were weaknesses where things happened which should never have been allowed to happen. And myself and Nigel have had long discussions about this, and it's about personalities. Well, I personally think that there should be controls in place to prevent some of those breaches, as far as I'm concerned, in good governance. And I'm very hopeful that the Constitutional Review Working Group will fill some of those gaps, as far as I'm concerned, in governance. But I welcome the report. The report's very detailed, and I recommend it to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. A contribution from members. Councillor Phipps indicating. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the completion of the external audits. I mean, those was on the committee last year. Went through report after report where the 2020-21 one was delayed, and I see that is now done. But we're back in the situation with the 21-22 and saying that and the 22-23 will be done at the same time. Because I mean, we're now 23-24 and we're still not got a 21-22 external audit. It's like deja vu, isn't it? So how confident are you that we are going to get both of those at the same time? It says summer autumn, which is quite a large period. Can I have any comments on that, please?
I'll bring in Mr. Richards on this one, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just for the new members of the committee, with regards to the, and we have to think about the years, 2021-22 accounts, they were delayed, and this relates to national issues predominantly. There are some local issues, but generally national issues with regards to the valuation of highways assets that actually prevented a lot of local authorities completing their audits in a timely manner. Those issues have now resolved themselves, so therefore we're in a position we can move to actually undertake the audits and finalise those audits. In our case, that process of undertaking the audits was delayed because our external auditor had himself some issues with regards to capacity. So the decision was made that they would undertake what we refer to as a simultaneous exercise in relation to 21-22 and 22-23 at the same time. The reality is they work through one and then they work on to the other. They are on site. They've started that as promised in July, and they are actively working through with the team that process. They are making good progress, and with regards to an element of those accounts, which is the value for money statement, we expect them to be in a position to conclude that towards the end of August.
Thank you for that. Mr. Stannard.
Yeah, it might be worth adding as well that there's an unprecedented low completion rate of 21-22 audit. So this is 21, so not the current year, but the previous year. Still, nationally, only 21% of audits are done.
So just to say, I do remember this because this came up at this committee so many times, didn't it? On the infrastructure assets, the national infrastructure assets, I know that there are some councils that actually did get their audits through, but because we were delayed, it made matters worse that then this infrastructure assets issue came forward. But I mean, it is resolved now, so it's sort of history. But I'm pleased to hear that you're looking at August now, and we're getting there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Yeah, Chair, maybe for the other members of the committee, just to provide a little bit of an explanation. What happened in regards to 21-22 is the audit profession started undertaking those audits. And those that are completed quite early, they managed to conclude their 21-22. However, there was one instance where an audit firm challenged the basis around the valuation of highway assets, and that then brought basically all those other audits that hadn't been completed or hadn't even started at that point in time to a grinding halt while that issue was resolved. So there were some that got there before that issue was raised, and they were okay, they were done. It was those that came after that, and generally, your bigger local authorities, they take quite a long time to go through that process, and therefore got a caught through that mechanism.
Thank you for that. So basically going 5 miles per hour as opposed to 50 miles per hour on the highway assets. Yes. Yes. Okay. Councillor Cox, is that a fresh indication to talk?
It is, yeah. I just wanted to comment that I've had a meeting with the auditor in the last few weeks, and obviously expressed my concern about the timing of the audits. He's reassured me that just as Adam said, that they're working on it now, and they're hoping to complete, you know, on schedule, effectively. I mean, clearly it was well, unprecedented that they had to stop the audit because one of their managers walked away, and for which we were, you as a audit committee, was very critical. But you know, I feel the relationship with the auditor is back on track a bit, and that we should be getting there. So I'm hopeful that we will get back to where we should be. But the one thing I would say, and Adam might be able to give more information on this, is that there's been a recent pronouncement from central government about audits, and I think that some of them are going. I can't remember the exact words they used, Adam. It was something along the lines that they might ignore a few, or do a limited assurance on some of them rather than doing a full audit. Is that what they were saying?
Mr. Richards is filling there.
Yeah, just to respond to the portfolio holders' comments, you know, what the industry is looking at is it helps nobody with regards to having statement of accounts that are years out of date. So, you know, for example, for us, you know, doing a year's audit is probably, the audit team will take at least a month, if not longer, you know, part of that process. Sorry, not a month, 4 months to do that process. So it can take quite a long time to go through these processes. So they're looking at mechanisms that actually might speed that up, and that might be that instead of, you know, having an unqualified opinion, you almost have, you know, as a portfolio holder referred to, is some kind of statement, you know, of, you know, actually we recognize that these aren't gone through the whole process, but actually, you know, that is the position at that point in time, and that's probably, you know, from there they can move on. I suddenly thought of that, what that phrase was, and it's just gone out of my head again. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chief Executive, did you want to say something?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to go back to the discussion about the AGS, and just to make sure that this committee is also aware that the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities have also carried out an assurance review. We're expecting that to be reported, for the best phrase is imminently. We think it might be next week, but it'll be sometime over the next few weeks. And obviously we need to incorporate anything that might come out of that, but also reflect in the ag statement when we bring it back to the committee. I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware that that was going on as well.
Thank you very much for that. What I should point out, although generally this is a report to note, there's also effectively a decision to make. If you look at page 129, item B, that we've been asked to, or you're being asked to agree that if there is a need for an in-year material amendments, that decision is delegated to, well, myself as the chair of Audit and Governance and the leader of the council. So just to emphasise that, you know, agree this unanimously, hopefully, that you are also signing up to that delegation of a power which might or may not be needed. Mr. Stannard?
Just to be clear, Chair, that's not what the Chief Exec's just alluded to. That recommendation there is about the local code of governance. So that's the BCP document that says how we show good governance and how we choose to govern BCP Council. The Chief Exec was talking about probably the need to amend the AGS, which is the pre-audited version that's noted on recommendation A.
Okay, but noted. But if we agree with items A and B in that recommendation, we can move on to the next item, unless anybody wants to dissent. Okay, I think that's okay. Thank you very much. Moving on, nearly there, as it were. Item 17. This is the appointment of some members to the Constitution Review Working Group. It is a working group that has operated before, but constitutionally, effectively, obviously, it needs to be restarted. And I think, Mr. Jones, you're going to present some comments and a paper on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, members. Again, very briefly, I'm not going to go through the report in full. It's fairly brief and I think self-explanatory. But as you said, the report is seeking the re-establishment and appointment of members to the Constitution Review Working Group to consider and review proposed changes to the Constitution. Just as a reminder, any recommendations from the working group come back to this committee and then on to full council for final approval. The working group usefully has previously engaged with other members, so whilst it's seeking 5 members to sit on the working group, it has engaged with other members who have had particular interests, made proposals, or have a particular role, for instance, the chair of planning or the chair of licensing to those, and that's been most useful for that, through that process. The working group may look at all parts of the Constitution with the exception of those that are the remit of the Standards Committee, so that's only the Code of Conduct and the Protocol for Member and Officer Relations. It's not in the report, but just to aid those members who may be appointed, the meetings have typically been held online via MS Teams, so they're not in-person meetings, they are online. The day and the time will be agreed with the members when they're appointed, but again, from previously, they have been typically around 4 or 5 o'clock commencement times, but we'd work with the members. And the recommendations are in 2 parts. One, to establish re-establish the working group, comprising 5 councillors, recommended to be the chair and vice chairman of this committee, plus 3 other members. The leader, as the portfolio holder for the Constitution, has engaged with the committee members to seek interest of expressions to serve on the working group. And there were 5, I think, who actually indicated an interest. So that was yourself, Chairman, your Vice Chairman, Councillor Connolly, and then Councillors Beasley, Castle and Councillor Phipps. The second part of the recommendation is to approve the remit of the working group that's set out in detail in paragraph 10 to the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I think it's very important that this working party gets up and meets as soon as possible. So I'm going to suggest from the chair that perhaps we can appoint the members, the additional 3 members at this meeting this evening. So a diary date, I know we've got holidays, everything like that, but as soon as practical, we can have an online Teams meeting and give obviously the office sufficient time to get some papers to present to us. I did have Councillor Phipps indicating to me previously that she was interested in standing on the working party, and she's nodding and agreeing. Another member who had previously contacted me was Councillor Castle, who is again nodding and indicating that he's agreeing. I think it would be invaluable, the working party, that somebody who was previously on it. I don't think Councillor Fitz was previously on it, but I'm looking in the direction of Councillor Beasley as to whether he would be willing to be the 5th member of the working party. And if so, then we have the 5.
Well, Chairman, the Leader of the Council contacted me and asked me just that question, would I be prepared to, and I affirmed that I would.
That's excellent, thank you. So, Mr Jones, you have the 5, and you may want to circulate what would be the most convenient time or day with those people, so that you can perhaps put in motion having the first meeting set up on Teams.
Through you, Chair, if I may just confirm, we will indeed be in touch with the 5 members now that we've got names to arrange a meeting fairly soon.
And just for the record, for the officer, can we agree the recommendation as set out on page 199, item 17? Thank you. We don't need to have a vote on that, but that is all agreed. And I think the last item is item 18. It's the forward plan, effectively a refresh for the 23-24 municipal year. And Mr. Stannard, can you present your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think if we go straight to the appendix on page 205, you'll see that the core meetings of audit and governance are fairly well developed in terms of the forward plan. There's some statutory dates and statutory things to look at, so it all falls quite nicely. What you will see is that there are, excuse me, froggy throat, 3 meetings which are not considered core. They've got this little extra flag on the brackets in the column there. And what's happened in the past and seemed to work very well, and Councillor Beasley might want to say something through you, Chair, is that those dates were put in the diary for any deeper dive presentations or sessions or on any particular topic that the committee wished to consider. You'll notice that on the 7th of March version of that, we have put in the annual evolutions of all the policies that the committee look at. But other than that, those extra dates are empty at the moment, ready for you to determine what you want to look at.
Thank you for that. I'm just eyeing myself personally the one for the 30th of November 23, having alluding back to the previous item of the working party on the Constitution, as to whether, you know, we need that one to happen. Obviously, that it all depends on what the working party comes up with. They may need or feel they need more than one meeting to make any recommendations to this committee. But that is noted, what you've said there. And yes, you know, those are the penciled in meetings to fit in with other meetings of this council. And you know, if we need to have extra meetings, there is too much items for the agenda of the October meeting or the January meeting, then we will have to probably have extra meetings. Is there any comment, Councillor Phipps?
Yeah, so can you just tell me how you propose to operate the process on us putting forward topics for that we would like to come forward to look at in more depth? Previously, I mean, I think it's up to you, probably, Chairman, as how you deal with that. Do we sort of say something now, or are you going to email out, or how are you going to do that, and how can we put things forward? What process would you
I don't think we want to delay the meeting and then start a mini debate on numerous topics, but I think it might be useful if particularly members of this committee who have got some issues which some of their colleagues have raised with them can bring it to my attention, perhaps copying the Vice Chair as well. Mr. Stan, I'll perhaps take your advice on this as to whether a blanket email to all councillors is necessary, so that everybody knows that they've been given the chance to raise whatever they might feel is appropriate for audit and governance to consider. You know, is that necessary?
Yes, I can do that, Chair. What I think would be a good idea is if I recirculate the terms of reference, because we need to be careful that we don't stray into scrutiny or just looking at stuff. We need to be aware of what our remit is, and it'd be useful to have the terms of reference, I think, when you or whoever sends an email out to canvass views.
It might be something that you and I need to get together about and get something drafted, so that, you know, when the members, and there's all, you know, I don't know the statistics, but there's an awful lot of new members, yes, you know, rather than creating unnecessary work for them, suggesting things that we can't even debate, that something needs to go out. But I think it would be very useful if all the councillors are given the opportunity to potentially advance something that they feel that this committee should consider in the future. So again, Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one or two thoughts, if I may, and it might be helpful if members look at Appendix A while I'm speaking. Certainly, just referring to the point that you were discussing a moment ago with Mr. Stannard, over the past 4 years, and it's completely a matter for you how you arrange this, but I have always made sure that I've written to members of this committee to ask if they've got any issues which they think should be coming up as agenda items. That can then, if you like, be gatekeepered by the chairman in conjunction with the officers, and also alongside that, but less frequently, writing to all members of the council along similar lines. It's been quite interesting what then comes back, and how in most cases it does fit the remit of audit and governance. But the point Mr. Stannard makes is really important, we must not stray from our central remit. And it is very easy for that to happen unless those safeguards are firstly in place. Taking you to Appendix A, that therefore meant that additional meetings were introduced from 4 years ago through to now. It may be that that is sufficient additional meetings, or it may not be. It just depends what comes forward that's legitimate business. But what I would say is that focusing on our next meeting scheduled here as an extra meeting on the 7th of September, there are some items which I think very usefully could be considered on that date. And they are already on here. If I take you down to the bottom, it's around the review of the council's constitution, and it's also around the external auditor. So the review of the council's constitution, this committee can very easily get bogged down in that, which is why with the working group starting relatively soon, it's important to move that business and those recommendations through to this committee as quickly as possible. And I'd be very surprised if come the 7th of September, we're not in a position to do that, because the more you can get rid of in terms of accumulating business and deal with it properly, the better, because others will then come in to fill the gaps, I'm sure. So there's that side of it. The other part is the external auditor, who doesn't have an agenda item this evening, but I don't think that our next presentation and discussion and questions to the external auditor can wait until the 26th of October, given that the last contact this committee had with the external auditor was back in March time. So we really do need, I think, to have that opportunity. Therefore, the 7th of September would seem to me, Chairman, to be the ideal time to be doing that. And I think it then moves things on so that when we get to the 26th of October, some of those may need to be repeated according to other business, but at least we've made the progress in between that I think is necessary.
Thank you for that contribution. Obviously, very early, one of the early, Matt Filmer was presenting his report earlier on. He was actually talking about a training thing for members of this committee. So potentially that date of the 7th of September, if we can bring people along, not only for a formal committee meeting, but also the training at the same time, that might potentially merge the two things, and the training can assist the members. That is something which I would suggest. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As Matt's gone offline, I'll take that away and check the availability of our Treasury Management advisors. So I think he indicated would be the firm that we would get in to give that independent training to members. As part of that process, we can check that. In regards to the reference to the external auditor, I think we've heard from the committee clerk earlier that he's given his apologies tonight because he's on annual leave. He will and does normally attend each of these meetings. He is scheduled to come to future meetings. We do have regular catch-ups between myself and him as the CFO to external auditor and my team. I do know that he has a relationship, as Councillor Cox has already referred to, with regards to regular catch-ups between the two of them on a one-to-one basis, with regards to any salient issues regards to this committee. I think I've already referenced that in regards to the 21-22 accounts and 22-23 accounts, he is on site, his team is on site, they are working that through, good progress is being made, and that we expect to see the outcome of the value for money assessment towards the end of August, which potentially could feed into that September timetable or the October, depending on finalisations as to where they are with that process.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask Mr. Jones, if we do go for a committee meeting on the 7th of September, is it feasible and likely that the working party on the Constitution can meet before that and you can get the report presented already, even if it's a verbal report?
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, that absolutely. I think we intend to convene a meeting of the working group within time to actually present something back to this committee on the 7th of September if there are matters arising from discussions at that working group. So yes, I think we can.
Okay, well, I think that's sensible, perhaps to have a formal committee meeting, but also after or prior to the committee meeting, have, if possible, a training session if personnel are available to train us. Councillor Phipps.
Can I just come back to topics that we might want to suggest? Whilst I realise you want to offer that to the whole council, obviously you might get a lot back, I don't know. And I'm just thinking whether in the first instance, as it's quite, there's quite a lot here, and we're now filling up the 7th as well, whether you might write to the committee or ask committee first, because obviously then if any topics are agreed or you're happy with them, there still has to go for officers to do reports to come, and there's a there's a time scale on it.
I agree. Noting Councillor Beasley's and Mr. Stanlard's comments about the fact that we can only debate things which are within our remit, I think I need to get together with Mr. Stannard at an early time to just even for this committee, explain what is within the remit, because there's a lot of new councillors here who may think they would like us to discuss something or other, and we don't want them to waste their time thinking and proposing something which is beyond our remit. So, Mr. Stannard, if we can get together in the next 2 or 3 working days and get something sorted, which we can initially circulate to this committee. Thank you. If that's acceptable. Councillor Cox, is that an indication to talk?
It is, yes. I just wanted to echo Councillor Beasley, what Councillor Beasley said, and I thought that was a very good suggestion. But I did also want to highlight the fact that I think there will be something coming from Cabinet to this committee, which we would like you to look at in the 6th or 7th of September meeting. So I would definitely like you to have the meeting then, because there's something that we need to get through for you then to recommend to council if you feel appropriate.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll obviously communicate with Mr. Stannard if that's something, or Mr. Richards, and so we can get the paper prepared and put it on the agenda, hopefully. Thank you. So basically, we've got a recommendation to note the forward plan, but obviously Mr. Hatton and the officers note what's been said about the fact that we need to be clear what can be added to the forward plan, only things that within our remit. So again, on that basis, we accept the recommendation. Thank you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, I think is the last item for the evening. Thank you for your forbearance. About 20 minutes past 8 or whatever. So I would formally close the meeting. Thank you, the public, listening in. Good evening. Thank you.